I still remember the day it all began. A bright, quiet Saturday morning that smelled of freshly cut grass and the faint sweetness of my neighbor's jasmine vines. I was standing by my fence, coffee in hand, admiring how peaceful the cul-de-sac looked. Birds chirped, sprinklers clicked on, and for once, life in the Willow Creek neighborhood felt calm. That peace didn't last. I noticed something odd. A group of contractors setting up orange cones behind my fence, right where my property line met the HOA's community center. They were unrolling blueprints pointing toward my yard and marking the ground with bright spray paint. At first, I thought they were repairing the drainage ditch that ran behind our properties. So I walked over, waved, and asked, "Hey, what's going on here?" One of the workers, a young guy with a hard hat and earbuds dangling from his neck, said casually, "New pool project, sir." HOA said to extend the deck about 15 feet out this way. 15 feet? I frowned. "That's my land." "You sure about that?" He shrugged. "I just follow the map, sir. Talk to the HOA president." And that's exactly what I did. Now, let me tell you something about our HOA president, Linda Monroe. If perfection had a face and an attitude problem, it would be hers. The kind of woman who smiled at you just to measure your lawn later. Always wearing pastel cardigans. Always just trying to keep the community beautiful. When I knocked on her door, she greeted me with that exact tight-lipped smile. "Morning, Linda," I said. "I just came from my backyard. The construction crew says they're extending the new pool onto my property line." She tilted her head like she was examining a bug on the wall. "Oh, that? Yes, there may be a slight overlap while the pool deck is constructed, but don't worry. It's all been cleared by the board." I raised my eyebrow. Cleared by the board doesn't mean cleared by me. "That's my land, Linda. The fence marks it." She waved her hand, dismissing me like I was overreacting. "I'm sure it's just a measurement error. I'll have the survey team double-check." But she didn't. Days turned into weeks, and construction kept going. The sound of drills and hammers filled my mornings. The smell of wet cement replaced the jasmine. I called the HOA office 3 times. No reply. I sent emails with screenshots of my property deed. No response. Finally, I went down to the county records office myself. I got a certified copy of the property line survey. And there it was in black and white. The HOA's new pool deck was 14 feet over my boundary. 14 feet. I drove home that day with the papers in my hand and fury in my chest. My land wasn't just overlapped. They had taken it. That evening, I walked to the construction site again. The workers were packing up for the day, the pool already taking shape, glistening blue tiles under the sunset. I stood there, watching them, feeling completely helpless. Then one of my neighbors, Ben, walked over. "Hey, man," he said, squinting at the pool. "Looks nice, huh? You gonna get free access since it's half on your property?" I laughed bitterly. "Access? They didn't even ask permission. They stole my land." Ben's expression turned serious. "You should talk to a lawyer, dude. Linda's been pulling this kind of stuff for years. She thinks she owns the whole block." And so I did. The next morning, I met with a local real estate attorney named Paula Grant. She looked over my documents, clicked her tongue, and said, "You're in the right. No question. They built on private property without consent. But I'll tell you, HOAs are tricky. They stall, they deny, they twist words. Be patient and keep every record." So I did exactly that. I documented everything. Photos, emails, timestamps, every single ignored message. I even recorded a few conversations when Linda brushed me off in the community meetings. But as the weeks passed, the construction finished. The pool was done. A shining, luxury-style centerpiece with a waterfall feature and brand-new lounge chairs. And yes, about 1/5 of it was still on my land. Then, one afternoon, I got the invitation. A gold-embossed card slipped into my mailbox. "You're cordially invited to the grand opening of the Willow Creek Community Pool, this Saturday at 2 p.m. Refreshments provided." I read it 3 times, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. They had the nerve to not only take my land, but to celebrate it, right in front of me. I stood there in my kitchen, holding that shiny invitation, and a thought started forming in my mind. Not an angry thought. A calm, cold one. If they wanted to play dirty, I could too. But I'd do it legally, smartly, and with an audience. Because if the HOA thought they could ignore me forever, they were about to find out how wrong they were. But things were about to get worse, and far more public than Linda ever imagined. When Saturday rolled around, I didn't go anywhere near the pool's grand opening. From my backyard, though, I could hear everything. The splash of water, the clinking of champagne glasses, the fake laughter echoing across my stolen land. Linda's voice carried over the speakers like nails on a chalkboard. We're proud to unveil this new addition to Willow Creek, a symbol of community and togetherness. I stared at the shining blue water through the slats of my fence and whispered to myself, "Togetherness? You built it on my property." By the next morning, my patience was gone. I drove to the county registrar's office again, filed for a property boundary verification, and within a few days, I had a notarized deed copy and survey map proving, beyond any doubt, that part of that pool sat squarely on my land. It wasn't a matter of inches. It was 14 feet of concrete, plumbing, and tile that didn't belong there. Armed with the papers, I marched to the HOA office. Linda was sitting at her desk, sipping something out of a crystal glass like she was running a Fortune 500 company instead of a neighborhood association. Her smile froze the moment she saw me. "Mr. Rivers," she said, setting down her drink. "Is there a problem again?" "Again?" I said, setting the folder down in front of her. "Linda, this isn't again. It's the same problem you've been ignoring for 3 months." She glanced at the folder, not even opening it. "I told you before, our contractors followed the HOA's site plans. Everything was reviewed and approved." I pushed the papers closer. "Then your site plans are wrong. This," I pointed to the line on the survey, "is my property. You built on it. I have the official deed and county verification. You're trespassing." Linda sighed like she was dealing with a child. "Mr. Rivers, you're being unreasonable. The pool is for the benefit of the community. Surely you don't want to ruin that over a few feet of dirt." I clenched my jaw. 14 feet of concrete, Linda. That's not dirt. That's theft," she smirked. "Well, I'm afraid the board has already voted to keep the current layout as is. There's nothing else to discuss." I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. "So you're refusing to fix it?" She leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and said, "I'm refusing to entertain baseless claims. Have a good day, Mr. Rivers." That was it. I walked out of there shaking, but not broken. Not anymore. Because in that moment, as her words echoed in my head, something clicked. If she wanted to play this game in front of the community, I'd give her a show she'd never forget. That night, I sat at my desk with a notepad and my laptop. I began sketching out a plan. It started small. Maybe put up a private property sign or file a formal complaint. But the more I thought about how smug she looked, the more I realized that simple wasn't enough. I needed something memorable. And then, like fate, I stumbled upon the idea. While researching property laws online, I read a case where a homeowner had every legal right to remove any structure built on their land without consent, even if it was shared with others. The law was clear. If something was built on your property, you owned it, and you had the right to control or remove it as you saw fit. My eyes stopped on one phrase: lawful reclamation. That's when it hit me. I wouldn't just protest. I'd reclaim what was mine. I started gathering the tools I'd need: a portable industrial pump, some thick hoses, and a few long extension cords. The setup looked innocent enough, like something you'd use to clean a pond or drain a flooded basement. But in my mind, it was justice waiting to happen. Over the next week, I played it cool, smiled at neighbors, mowed my lawn, even waved at Linda once. But every night I'd test my pump in the garage, adjusting the valves, checking the power draw. It worked beautifully, strong enough to move thousands of gallons of water an hour. Meanwhile, the HOA was bragging about the pool everywhere. Flyers went out, emails announced summer kickoff parties, and Linda even gave a little interview for the neighborhood newsletter about how the community's leadership made it happen. I kept quiet. Let them build the hype, because when you're planning revenge, silence is your best weapon. Then one day, as I was walking to my mailbox, my neighbor Ben called out, "Hey man, did you see the new pool lights? They're installing a sound system next week." I grinned. "Good to know. Hope it's waterproof." He laughed, not catching my tone. But I meant every word. A few days later, I received a formal letter from the HOA. My stomach twisted when I saw the logo. Inside, it read, "Dear Mr. Rivers, we've received your repeated claims regarding the pool's boundary encroachment. After review, the board finds no evidence of wrongdoing. Please refrain from further disruptions or you may be subject to community sanctions. Sincerely, Linda Monroe, President Sanctions. For defending my land, that letter was the final push I needed." I folded it neatly, slid it into a folder marked Evidence, and said out loud, "All right, Linda, you want to pretend I don't exist? You're about to hear me loud and clear." From that day, I started preparing every detail. I studied the pool's plumbing layout, figured out where their water supply connected, and, more importantly, where it crossed onto my property line. Turns out, part of the filtration system sat directly over my section of ground, which meant, legally, that system was mine. I could already picture it. The HOA's big event. Music blasting, people cheering, and then water gurgling down the drain while Linda's perfect little smile disappeared. But before I pulled the trigger on my plan, I wanted to be absolutely certain it was bulletproof. So I went back to Paula, my lawyer, and showed her everything. She looked over the documents, then leaned back and said with a slow smile, "If your property line includes that equipment and if you can prove it, then yes, you're well within your rights to drain anything that sits on your land. Just make sure you document it all. Video, timestamp, witnesses if possible." I nodded. "Oh, I'll make sure of that," she laughed softly. "You're really going to do this, aren't you?" "Oh, I'm going to do more than that," I said. "I'm going to make them regret ever ignoring me." And as I drove home that night with the documents sitting on my passenger seat, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm, methodical, like a man who already knew the ending of his own story. Because now, I wasn't just fighting for a few feet of land, I was fighting for the principle that no one, not even a smug HOA president, gets to trample over what's rightfully yours. But as I'd soon learn, revenge, even the legal kind, what comes with its own kind of storm. The night before I meant to act, sleep felt like a stranger. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while the neighbor's porch light hummed through the blinds. Every little noise sounded huge. A late car, a dog barking, the distant click of Linda's door shutting. My mind ran through the steps again and again like a broken record. Confirm the line, start the pump, document everything, and don't lose my cool. Simple, clean, legal. No vandalism, no theatrics beyond what the law allowed. Just reclaim what was mine. Early the next morning, I went through my checklist like a pilot before takeoff. I packed the pump, hoses, clamps, my toolbox, a battery backup, and the folder with every piece of evidence. The deed, county survey maps, recorded messages, and the email trail. I added my phone on a tripod for a steady recording and another phone as a backup. I even printed laminated copies of the survey to show anyone who came asking questions. Paula had insisted on excess documentation, and I took it seriously. If this turned into an argument in front of a crowd, I wanted the facts to be unassailable. I spent the first hour testing the pump one last time on the driveway. It growled to life. A low, mechanical purr that felt reassuring and dangerous all at once. The hoses filled and expelled water in a steady stream. The machine was ready. So was I. I waited until the HOA's big summer bash was in full swing. Their timing was perfect. Saturday afternoon, sun blazing, kids with floaties, and a DJ thrumming the kind of pop music that makes adults forget how to listen to complaints. I watched from my kitchen window as the party unfolded. Linda standing beneath a white canopy, smiling like she'd swallowed confidence whole. My neighbors chatted and laughed, some holding paper cups while others climbed the pool ladder. The sight of it made my stomach flip in a way that wasn't entirely free of satisfaction. When the moment felt right, I slipped out through the side gate that led to the back alley and walked the narrow path behind the properties. The air smelled of sunscreen and sizzling burgers. I could hear the muffled bass through the fence. My heart was steady. My hands were steady. People imagine revenge as a roaring wave, but that day it felt like a precise strike, surgical and cold. I sat up in the shadow of the fence where the HOA had dug the plumbing trench that crossed my property. It was surprisingly easy to get to. A cluster of pipes and valves partially buried under gravel, the kind of mundane infrastructure you never notice until it's the center of a problem. I clipped the hoses around the main return line that ran where my land met theirs. My hands moved with the quiet competence of practice. A car door slammed, and my neighbor Ben's voice drifted over, friendly and unaware. "Hey, you okay back there? You're putting in a garden fountain or something?" He called. I lifted a hand and offered a calm smile. "Just doing some yard maintenance, Ben. You know how it is." My voice was casual because I didn't want him to suspect anything. He laughed and waved, then returned to the pool party. Before I fired up the pump, I took a moment to set up the cameras. One phone went on the tripod, aimed at the valve cluster. Another I pointed at the fence line, ensuring the survey map was visible in frame. I spoke into the camera for a few seconds. Name, date, and a short statement. "This is Mujahid Hussein. Today's date is insert date. I am about to operate a pump to remove water from the Willow Creek community pool, which encroaches on my property at the line shown in this survey." Paula had insisted on this little theater as a legal safety net, and I obeyed every piece of her script. When the pump thrummed to life, it was louder than I expected. The hose sucked water with an eager slurp and then spat it into the alley gutter. For a minute, nothing dramatic happened. The surface of the pool rippled. Kids kept splashing. Linda waved at someone. Then, slowly, the water level began to drop. Not wildly, but noticeably. At first, people glanced and shrugged. Pools evaporate, maintenance happens. But my phone caught every second. The water line receding past the painted depth markers, the edge of the mosaic tiles peeking where they hadn't been visible before. And then, voice over the speakers. "Attention, Willow Creek residents. For safety reasons, we will be conducting a brief maintenance check of the pool. Please remain calm." The DJ's attempt at damage control sounded like someone patching a hole with a post-it note. Linda's smile faltered. She scanned the crowd, her eyes landing on the far fence where I stood. For the first time since this had started, she looked genuinely rattled. Her hands tightened around the champagne flute like it was a lifeline. "What's he doing?" She hissed to a board member beside her. "That's my property. You can't do that." A woman near the edge of the pool, Mrs. Alvarez, who'd always been fiercely protective of the neighborhood's image, shouted, "Who authorized that? Is someone tampering with the filters?" "That would be Mr. Rivers," Ben called from his lounge chair, recognition dawning. "He's the one. Said it was his property." There was a beat of confusion, of people trying to figure out fact from fiction. I walked out slowly, hands visible, the other phone in my pocket recording my approach and the cluster of witnesses. I kept my voice steady. "Hello, everyone," I said, projecting over the music with a calmness I momentarily envied. "I don't want a scene. I want to be clear. This section of pool," I held up the laminated survey for everyone to see, "was built on my property without my permission. I've tried to resolve this through the HOA and the board, and I have the legal right to reclaim what's mine. So, I am draining the portion of the pool that sits on my land until the situation is properly addressed." There was a collective intake of breath. Kids stopped splashing. Conversations died. The DJ's music sputtered and then went quiet. Linda's face shifted color from porcelain to something sharp and strained. "You can't do that," she said, the words sharp as a snapped twig. "You'll ruin the community's property. We'll take you to court. Then sue me," I said. "But for now, the water is on my property and it's my right to remove it. I'm acting within the law, and there's documentation." I tapped the phone on my chest, where the date and my short recorded statement waited. The crowd split into factions instantly. Some nodded sympathetically, remembering the late notices they'd received or the times Linda had fined a kid for a minor landscaping issue. Others scowled, thinking of summer plans being ruined. The board members clustered together, speaking in quick, worried whispers. Linda marched toward me, her posture all indignation and practiced authority. "You can't just unilaterally take action," she said, voice trembling with effort to remain composed. "This is community property, not yours." "It's on my land," I replied simply. "And until this is fixed, I'm not going to subsidize a project that wasn't approved by me." She opened her mouth, probably thinking of excuses or threats, but the sound of a phone camera clicking drowned her out. Someone had already posted a live clip online. The crowd was a live audience now, and whatever argument she'd rehearsed evaporated under scrutiny. The pump kept humming. The water kept going out. I stood there quiet, watching people's faces as the truth and the inconvenience collided. I felt an odd mix of vindication and sorrow. It wasn't joy, exactly. There was a gravity to what I'd done. A boundary enforced, yes, but at the cost of a neighborhood summer day and someone's delicate reputation. Linda finally looked at me like she'd seen something she couldn't unsee. "You've made this public," she said. "You've humiliated me. You made it private," I replied, "and you hid it from me. There's a difference." Her mouth opened. No words came. Around us, phones recorded, whispers circulated, and the pool, that bright, expensive symbol of the HOA's power, was reduced to wet tile and a dipping water line. What I hadn't expected, during my long nights of planning, was how quickly the room would polarize and how the cameras would turn every accusation into evidence. It was beautiful in a cold way and terrifying in its implications. People would take sides. Lawsuits would be filed. Neighborhood gossip would heat into something else. But as the pump kept draining, and as Linda's smile broke into something close to panic, I felt a stiff satisfaction that had nothing to do with the spectacle, only the firmness of a boundary finally enforced. The sun climbed higher and the water slipped lower. Voices rose. Somewhere in the chain of events, the neighborhood I thought I knew rearranged itself into a before and an after. What happened next shocked me completely, and would change everything about Willow Creek. By the next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. It started before sunrise. Messages from neighbors, missed calls, and a flood of notifications from social media. Apparently, someone at the pool had uploaded a short clip of the incident. The video showed Linda yelling at me while the pool water drained behind us, the crowd looking stunned. The caption read, "HOA President builds pool on neighbor's land. He drains it during grand opening." Within 12 hours, it had 500,000 views. By breakfast, local reporters were calling my number. Someone had leaked my name and they wanted an interview. At first, I wasn't sure whether to talk. I wasn't looking for fame. I just wanted justice. But then I thought about all the times Linda ignored me, the smug way she brushed me off, the way she acted untouchable. Maybe it was time her perfect little HOA image faced a bit of sunlight. So when Channel 8 News called, I said yes. They showed up that afternoon. A small crew, a cameraman, and a reporter named Sarah who looked like she'd seen 100 neighborhood dramas but still found mine interesting. We stood by the drained pool, which now looked more like a cracked basin than a luxury feature. "So, Mr. Rivers," Sarah began, microphone in hand, "you claim the HOA pool was built partially on your private property?" I nodded and held up the laminated survey. "Not a claim, proof. County records show this line here is mine. 14 feet of this pool crosses that line. I tried to handle it quietly. They ignored me for months. So I enforced my right to reclaim my land." She raised her eyebrows. "And you did that by draining the pool?" I smiled a little. "Yes, ma'am, legally." The cameraman panned across the empty pool while a few neighbors lingered at their fences watching. Sarah asked a few more questions, thanked me, and packed up. I figured that'd be the end of it, but by that evening, it wasn't just local news anymore. National blogs picked it up. Memes started spreading. One had my face photoshopped onto a pirate captain with the caption, "Reclaiming What's Mine." Another showed Linda scowling mid-argument, with the title, When HOA Power Trips Go Too Far. The Internet had turned my quiet act of boundary enforcement into a full-blown spectacle. That night, I sat in my living room watching the story unfold online. My email was flooded with messages. Strangers thanking me for standing up to their own HOA bullies, people sharing horror stories about similar situations. It felt surreal, but amid the chaos, I couldn't ignore one thing. Linda hadn't said a word publicly. No statements, no interviews, just silence. And that silence told me one thing. She was planning her counterattack. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, a letter appeared on my doorstep. Thick paper, HOA letterhead, and all the self-importance Linda could muster. Notice of violation. You are hereby fined $1,200 for unauthorized interference with community property. You are further instructed to restore the pool to operational status within 14 days or face legal action. Willow Creek HOA Board, I laughed out loud. Legal action? Against me? The next morning, I walked into Paula's office and dropped the letter on her desk. She read it, chuckled, and said, "Oh, Linda's panicking. Can she actually fine me?" I asked. Paula shook her head. "Nope, they don't have jurisdiction over your property. And if they built over your boundary, technically they're liable for damages. You want to hit back?" I hesitated. "You mean sue?" She smiled. "Exactly. Property infringement, trespassing, and emotional distress. The footage is public record now. You have leverage. They'll cave before trial." So we filed. Within a week, Linda's confident silence cracked. She started sending out panicked HOA newsletters full of half-truths, blaming contractor miscommunication and boundary confusion. But everyone in Willow Creek had seen the video. They knew the truth. Same neighbors who once worshipped her perfect leadership were suddenly questioning every rule, every fine, every restriction. People began speaking up at meetings demanding transparency. A petition started circulating to call for a board re-election. I kept to myself during that time, watching the neighborhood unravel from behind my blinds. I didn't feel proud, not exactly, just resolved. For months, I'd been treated like a nuisance. Now, finally, people saw what had really happened. Then, one evening, Linda came to my door. When I opened it, she stood there without her usual pastel cardigan or perfect smile. Her eyes looked tired. "Can we talk?" she asked. I folded my arms. "About what?" She sighed. "About ending this. The lawsuit, the video, the circus. It's destroying the neighborhood." I studied her face. "You mean it's destroying your reputation?" She looked down. "Maybe both." For a moment, the silence between us wasn't angry, just heavy. "You could have avoided all this," I said quietly. "All you had to do was admit the mistake." She nodded slowly. "I know, but I can't undo what's online now. The board wants me to step down." I didn't feel satisfaction. Not the way I thought I would. She looked genuinely defeated, a woman cornered by her own arrogance. "So, what do you want from me?" I asked. She met my eyes. "I'll sign over the section of land, pay for the removal of the pool deck that's on your property, and resign. I just need your agreement to drop the lawsuit and issue a public statement saying the matter's resolved." I took a breath, let the words settle. This was what I'd wanted. Not revenge, but recognition. And maybe, in her own bitter way, Linda was finally giving me that. "All right," I said finally, "but you're paying for every inch of removal. And you'll make that statement first, on camera." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Fine," we shook hands. Her grip was shaky but sincere. A week later, the news cameras were back, this time to film Linda's resignation. She stood by the half-drained pool, reading from a written statement. "The Willow Creek HOA acknowledges an error in property line measurement during construction of the community pool. We regret the oversight and thank Mr. Rivers for bringing it to our attention." I watched from a distance as she finished, then turned and walked away without looking back. The neighborhood clapped, not loudly, but enough to make the message clear. The reign of Linda Monroe was over. For the first time in months, I felt the tightness in my chest ease. The fence line looked peaceful again. The sound of drilling and shouting was gone. But peace has a way of being temporary in neighborhoods like ours. Because just when I thought it was over, when I thought everything was done, something arrived in the mail that made my blood run cold. I thought the storm had finally passed. After Linda's public apology, the contractors came in to tear up the concrete that crossed my property line. The sight of it being dismantled, jackhammers pounding, chunks of tile breaking apart, felt like closure. Neighbors stopped by to congratulate me, some even thanking me for standing up for everyone. It felt finished, but peace, I've learned, doesn't last long when pride is wounded. It happened one humid Tuesday afternoon. I was sorting mail at my kitchen counter when I noticed a thick, official-looking envelope with a law firm's logo on it. My stomach sank before I even opened it. The return address was downtown. Hollis and Pratt Attorneys at Law. I tore it open, half dreading what I'd find. Inside was a neatly typed letter with words that made my pulse quicken. Notice of Civil Action. Willow Creek Homeowners Association v. Thomas Rivers. The Willow Creek HOA hereby files suit for damages resulting from the unauthorized destruction and draining of community property, resulting in financial losses exceeding $40,000. I stared at the letter in disbelief. My hands tightened around the paper until it crinkled. They were suing me. Again. A laugh, part disbelief, part exhaustion, escaped my throat. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered. I called Paula immediately. She picked up after 2 rings. "Please tell me you're sitting down," I said. "Don't tell me." "Oh, I'm telling you," I interrupted. "They're suing me. 40 grand. Damages for draining community property." Paula sighed, the kind of weary sigh lawyers make when they're both impressed and disgusted by their opponents. "Linda must have found a way to twist the board against you before she resigned," she said. "Don't panic. This is desperation, not strength." I rubbed my forehead. "Desperation can still drain a bank account." She chuckled softly. "Lucky for you, you've got airtight evidence. We'll counterclaim for harassment and malicious prosecution. I'll file it first thing tomorrow." But that didn't stop the anxiety that settled in my chest like a stone. Even when you're right, court battles drain you in ways money can't measure. The thought of more legal fees, more arguments, more nights reading fine print, I was tired. Still, I wasn't backing down. Not this time. When the court date arrived, the air outside the county courthouse felt thick with tension. Reporters were already there, cameras ready. Apparently, word of the HOA pool war had spread farther than I realized. Someone even held a sign that said, "Justice for Property Owners." Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low murmurs as I sat beside Paula. Across from us sat the HOA's new acting president, a nervous-looking man named Jeff Kramer, and, to no one's surprise, Linda herself. She wasn't on the board anymore, but she sat behind their attorney, arms folded, chin high. She wanted to watch me lose. Their lawyer, a tall man in a gray suit, stood first. "Your Honor, the defendant acted maliciously, damaging a communal resource intended for public use. His actions cost the HOA tens of thousands in repairs and replacements." Paula rose next, her voice calm but cutting. "Your Honor, my client lawfully reclaimed his private property. The HOA built a pool across his deeded boundary without consent. He documented everything, and as per property law, he had every right to remove the encroachment." She slid a stack of photos and survey maps onto the judge's desk. The judge, a woman with sharp glasses and a tone that tolerated no nonsense, flipped through the documents. "So you're telling me," she said slowly, turning toward the HOA's lawyer, "that your client constructed a pool partly on someone else's land and is now suing him for touching it?" Jeff cleared his throat awkwardly. "There was confusion over the boundary, Your Honor." Paula smiled faintly. "Confusion that Mr. Rivers brought to their attention months before construction finished." The judge leaned back. "Do you have evidence refuting his ownership?" The lawyer hesitated. Papers shuffled. We, do not dispute the property line as recorded. The judge raised an eyebrow. Then this case is starting to look a lot like retaliation. Linda's jaw tightened. I caught her eyes from across the room. There was a flash of something there. Not anger anymore, but desperation. Like she'd gambled everything on one last move and it was slipping through her fingers. After reviewing both sides, the judge sighed. Here's what I'm going to do. The HOA's claim for damages is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I find their action frivolous and harassing. Mr. Rivers, you may submit a motion for legal fees to be reimbursed by the HOA. A hush fell over the courtroom. Then Paula smiled. Thank you, Your Honor. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Linda stood up abruptly, her face pale. She gathered her purse and walked out before anyone else moved. It was over. Truly, this time. Or so I thought. A few weeks later, after the HOA paid my legal fees and publicly dropped all charges, things in Willow Creek went eerily quiet. Linda sold her house and moved out. The new HOA president, Jeff, stopped by one morning to apologize personally and offer to rebuild trust. He handed me a bottle of wine and said awkwardly, "No hard feelings, right?" I laughed. "I'll let you know once the concrete dust settles." The pool, now smaller and rebuilt entirely within HOA boundaries, reopened a month later. No ribbon cutting, no speeches, just a quiet note in the newsletter. The community pool has been adjusted to comply with local property laws. That line made me grin every time I read it, but here's the funny thing about being the guy who stood up to an HOA. People start coming to you with their problems. Noise complaints, fines, parking violations. Suddenly, I was the unofficial neighborhood referee. I never asked for that role, but it came with a kind of quiet respect. One evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, Ben wandered over with 2 beers. "Man," he said, shaking his head, "you really changed this place." "Nobody pushes anyone around now," I smiled. "Guess sometimes you have to drain a pool to clean up a neighborhood." He laughed so hard he almost spilled his beer. I thought that was the perfect ending. Poetic justice. But fate wasn't done teaching me lessons, because not long after, I found something buried in my backyard that reopened a mystery I didn't even know existed. After the court victory, I thought life would finally return to normal. The HOA kept their distance, the new president turned out to be reasonable, and the rebuilt pool, now entirely off my property, stood as a quiet reminder of what happens when power meets proof. I went back to my old routines, fixing things around the house, mowing the lawn, and enjoying the calm that had been missing for months. But calm can be deceptive, because just when I thought I'd seen the last of that cursed pool, fate decided to leave me one last surprise. It started on a late Saturday morning. I was in the backyard, clearing out some debris left from the reconstruction, when my shovel struck something hard. At first, I thought it was just a chunk of leftover concrete, but the sound it made, a hollow metallic thud, told me otherwise. I knelt down, brushed away the dirt, and saw a piece of rusted metal about the size of a briefcase buried beneath the soil. Curiosity got the better of me. I dug deeper until the whole object came loose, covered in grime and spiderwebs. It was an old metal box, padlocked shut. My first thought was that it might have belonged to the previous owner of my house, but something about the way it was buried near the fence line made me pause. I carried it inside, set it on my workbench, and stared at it for a long minute. The lock was rusted, easy enough to snap with a hammer. When I finally cracked it open, the hinges squealed like something out of a ghost story. Inside were several folded documents yellowed with age and a small velvet pouch. My hands trembled as I opened the first paper. It was a land deed, dated from the early 1980s, long before the HOA even existed. The name on it wasn't mine, but the plot number was the same. And according to that old deed, my property line was actually larger than what the county currently showed. I frowned, flipping through the rest. There were survey maps, letters from a developer, and one typed note that read, "To whom it may concern, the property boundaries of Willow Creek Estates were revised without proper authorization. Documentation enclosed. Preserve this, should the matter ever be disputed." My heartbeat quickened. This wasn't just some forgotten paperwork. This was evidence. Evidence that the HOA's entire layout might have been built on a falsified or incomplete land revision decades ago, and inside the velvet pouch, a set of silver keys with a tag marked Maintenance Access, East Gate. I sat back in my chair, the weight of it all sinking in. If what I was reading was true, not only had the HOA built part of their pool on my property, they might have built half the community's east section on land that never legally belonged to them. For a moment, I thought about what to do. I could easily call Paula, have her dig into the records, and probably spark another legal earthquake. But as I stared at the papers, another thought crept in. A quieter, more personal one. What if I just let it go? The HOA had already been humbled. Linda was gone, and the new leadership seemed determined to play fair. Maybe stirring this up again would just poison the peace we'd all finally earned. Still, I needed to be sure. That afternoon, I walked over to Jeff's house, the new president, and showed him the box. His eyes widened as he looked through the papers. Holy, Tom, this is huge, he whispered. If this is legit, the HOA's boundaries are all wrong. Half the eastern homes, even part of the pool deck, it's all off. Yeah, I said quietly. And I don't want another war. I just want things to be right, legally this time. Jeff nodded slowly. I'll take this to the county office myself. We'll correct the maps quietly, no drama. For once, an HOA president actually kept his word. A few weeks later, a county surveyor came by, confirmed the old boundaries, and updated the records. Turns out my lot was a few feet larger in every direction. Nothing massive, but enough to make the truth official. Jeff called me later that day. It's done, he said. We fixed it. No lawsuits, no headlines. Just honesty, I thanked him. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Not the fragile kind, but the real kind. That night, I walked out to the edge of my yard. The rebuilt pool shimmered under the floodlights. Kids laughing, families chatting. No fences, no shouting. Just neighbors being neighbors. I took a deep breath, the cool air filling my lungs, and smiled. Funny how things come full circle. The pool that once symbolized greed and arrogance now stood as a reminder of humility and justice. I didn't need revenge anymore. I already had something better. Vindication. As I turned to head back inside, I noticed one of the old silver keys still sitting on my workbench through the window. The one labeled Maintenance Access, East Gate. I picked it up, rolled it between my fingers, and chuckled softly. Guess some locks, I said to myself, aren't worth opening. The camera of life faded out right there, with the soft hum of the pump, the glow of the pool lights, and the quiet satisfaction of a man who finally got his land, his peace and his lesson.